David Fowler, we're becoming the doc bros. It seems like we're talking about documentaries and mockumentaries lately, and today is no exception. We are here to talk about Are We Good? The new
We are.
documentary. Yes, the new documentary from a man whose last name destined him for show business, Stephen Feinartz. Stephen Feinartz. Wow. And it's a documentary about Marc Maron, the podcast stand-up comedy. I want to call him a legend because he was kind of a pioneer in
Mhm.
the podcast space and really helped launch the alternative comedy scene in New York. But as evidenced by this documentary, I don't think he would call himself a legend. He doesn't really have much good to say about himself or anybody else. He's definition of the sad sack comic, and this is an hour and 36 minutes chronicling his kind of life and career and search for, I guess, meaning and acceptance and mourning the loss of his girlfriend, filmmaker Lynn Shelton, who passed away a few years ago. There's a lot here to unpack. And I don't know if I can fairly assess this documentary because I'm inevitably going to compare it to a film that you and I saw last night that we will talk about at some point very soon called John Candy, I Like Me, which for my money is one of the best films I've seen in a decade. So that film was fresh in my head. 4 hours later, I get up and I watch this Marc Maron thing. So here we are, and we're just going to go for it. How you doing, David?
I'm doing good.
All right.
Good.
That's a lot to throw at you. So I'm done rambling. If you could, after you take a swig of your much needed coffee, I'm sure, synopsize Are We Good?
Yeah, so Are We Good is I wouldn't say it's an interesting documentary because it kind of dives right in. Yes, there is some footage from early Maron stuff, stand-up stuff from the Comedy Store and the Sunset Strip. But it mainly catches up with him kind of as he's figuring out how to move forward and navigate his grief from the sudden death of Lynn Shelton. And also, it's hard to explain it because if you're not already kind of in the know about Marc Maron and what his kind of shtick is and his approach to comedy, there's a lot of personal observations in his comedy and also observations about life. Now, a lot of comedians are like that, yes, but I think he he is a little bit of a curmudgeon.
A little bit.
Yeah, that's his thing. And that's fine. I think there's a little bit of curmudgeon in all of us. But that's kind of his thing. I mean, there's plenty of comedians out there who are, Lewis Black's a curmudgeon, and sometimes that works. But I think lately, and I only say this just because I've listened to a lot of his episodes over the years, and I feel like lately, Marc Maron is a guy who has been searching, and it's been interesting to see, like, even in this documentary, we definitely see the difference between today's Marc Maron and a long-haired, beardless Marc Maron kind of dealing with hecklers on the stage. There is some similarities there, but you could definitely see how age has kind of chilled him out, but also riled him up a bit too.
And that's I'm glad you brought that up because I did not see any kind of an arc. No, I mean, there is, and it's frustrating because there is one sequence in this documentary where he's talking about Lynn Shelton, where his entire disposition and cadence and his voice even changes, where he's not doing the curmudgeonly, bitchy shtick. He's just talking like a regular person. And it stood out to me. It's only like 2 minutes long. It was just so bizarre to me. I'm like, am I finally seeing the guy at the center of all this?
Yeah.
But at the end of it, like, he's throwing himself his 60th birthday party, and he's still complaining about like the lack of being Emmy nominated for his HBO special, and woe is me and all this stuff. Meanwhile, he's hanging out with like celebrities and other famous comics um, at his party, and that kind of gets to the point of my grievance with the documentary. I did not like this film. And I think part of that is, again, in unfair contrast to the John Candy pick, which painted, it was also a half hour longer, the John Candy movie, painted a full picture of a person's life and the world that they were navigating. Whereas this one is very much kind of, it jumps around, I think, too much, because the Lynn Shelton thing is introduced very early on, and then it disappears for like 25 minutes. And I thought, oh, we're just going to breeze past that. But then it comes up, and then it's a part of the rest of the film. So I don't know how that, there wasn't like anything narratively in Maron's life that would suggest why there would be this like blackout period of that in the, in the middle of his movie. And also, he gets into a lot of kind of like political stuff, but he's talking about the world pre-COVID and post-COVID, and a little bit during COVID, but there's no greater context. People 10 years from now could sit down and watch this movie and say, okay, Barack Obama was president and Maron got to interview him, and there was a pandemic, and then the country was like overrun by white supremacists and anti-trans people. Like, there's no delineation between those political movements, those moments in history, and how he feels about them. I'm sure he talked about them on his show. I know he's talked about them on social media, but watching this documentary, it's very confusing.
Well, I think, the documentary doesn't delve too deep into all of that. And
right,
that's somewhat unfortunate. I wasn't expecting it to, really, in a way. And I don't really know what the intent was. It's almost like there was an agreement between Maron and Feinartz. Is that really his last name?
Yeah, I looking at it on IMDb, I was like, is that how it's pronounced? And he calls him that, and references his name. Like, yeah, it's right there.
A Feinartz film. I almost feel like there was somewhat of an agreement of like, all right, well, you can follow me anywhere you want. Whatever, and we can talk about this, but we can't talk about that kind of thing. So maybe Maron was a bit too involved in this, in a way, in the making of it. I don't know, but I feel like the whole, even the title, "Are We Good?" I mean, that is something he would often ask on his podcast. He would start off, talking about, "Hey, are we good? Really, are we good?" And I think like for me, the documentary was a reminder of like what he's done with that podcast. It wasn't something he was expecting to do or planning on doing. It just kind of happened. And I think he was touching, like eventually he would get into a groove over the years and touch into something that was kind of needed pre-COVID, during COVID, and after COVID. Is somebody to actually like listen to you and actually kind of almost be your inner monologue in a way of like, these are a lot of the things that he was going on about. And a lot of times it was, curmudgeonly rants, but what he would bring up and go on about are things that a lot of us were kind of already thinking about, or even if we were not, it would kind of be somewhat enlightening, like, oh, okay, I never thought about that. And it's not like he was like this huge, knowledgeable commentator on life and social economics and all this stuff. He was just sharing like, hey, did you hear about that thing? Yeah. How are you dealing with that? And a lot of it seemed to have come from, we know that he was sober for quite a while. And you would imagine that a lot of this kind of, conversation, open conversation that he was having with the listener is stuff that he would pick up maybe from, I don't know if he went to AA or whatever, but like through that kind of like therapeutic type of conversation that I would imagine that he would have gone through, in order to get sober. So, I wish it delved a little bit more deeper, especially in, like, he's been famously sober for some time, and it would have been nice to know, like, how did he become sober, and how does he maintain it, and does he struggle with it, that kind of thing would be, very interesting to know and quite relatable. Maybe he's shared that before, but then again, after over 1,600 episodes of the podcast, I haven't listened to everyone, but so, I think what I appreciate about the documentary too is it shows, like, maybe for those who aren't aware of the podcast and its impact, it shows, like, kind of like a little bit of, like, behind the scenes, inside baseball type of the machinations of his podcast and how he does it, and why, kind of why he does it, why he continues to do it, his struggles with it. And I would say, if anything, that I think it's, and I understand, like, that the timing of you just watching the John Candy documentary and everything, but I think it's still, it's kind of a little bit of apples and oranges. The only thing they have in common is they both struggled with insecurities and anxiety and stuff, and heck, that's a lot of us, and especially a lot of comedians. But I think, like, there's something to just, it's almost like if you were to spend a good amount of time, like, following somebody that you hardly knew or only knew from, like, either memes or interviews, you would have, like, a little bit of a better understanding of, like, where they come from or what's going on with them. And I feel like you get a little bit of that here, maybe not enough.
Yeah. Well, I mean, here's the thing. Full disclosure context, I was a huge Marc Maron fan going back to the days of Air America Radio, which launched in, was it 04, I think?
Yeah.
And I followed him, when he started WTF, kind of like springboarding off of that, sneaking into the Air America studios and doing these kind of clandestine interviews before he began doing these things in his garage. I saw him perform, locally. I was kind of mentioning that to you last night, and it was a great show. I mean, I was literally inches away from him on the stage. But I have not listened to his podcast, which, WTF stands for what the fuck. And for those who might not know, of course, why are you watching this? Spoiler alert, by the way, I'm not going to put up the banner, but it's basically conversations with all sorts of people, typically, famous people, getting them to come into his garage studio to sit down for an hour and talk about, their life. Yeah, typically it's because, I've got an album coming out or a movie or something like that. But Maron is known for digging deeper than, say, a late night talk show host. There's no holds barred on, language and topics and things that are not off limits, unless, of course, there's a blow up like the Gallagher situation where Gallagher stormed out. But I haven't listened to that show in probably 10 years.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it just, at a certain point, I don't know. I don't know why. It's kind of like, I watch a lot of YouTube, and sometimes the algorithm will sneak up on me. So I'll be listening to a show religiously for months, and I'll forget to listen to something for a week. And then 3 months later, I'm like, I used to listen to that show. It's kind of the same thing with WTF. But watching the documentary, especially the early scenes where, like, one of the opening scenes is he's backstage waiting to go on, and he's listening to his opening act. And he's saying it's all personality with this guy. Like, the jokes are not that great, but he's got a personality to win people over. And he's kind of talking trash. And he talks a lot of trash about a lot of people in this documentary. And a lot of it is fueled from, like, some kind of a jealousy and or narcissism.
I think,
but it's
more insecurity. Yeah.
But I'm saying it's an insecure narcissism.
Yeah.
But I'm watching him complain and gripe and bitch and moan for 90 minutes. And then, he's sad and everything, and this is just a personal thing with me, when it comes out later that his, big romantic relationship with Lynn Shelton was built on both of them having an affair. She was married and he had a longtime girlfriend, and they left them for each other. I was like, I can't get behind that. But again, that's just me.
And that wasn't in the documentary.
That was in the documentary. Yeah.
It was?
Yeah. They mentioned it.
I missed it. All right.
There was a line. He said, "Eventually we got it on the level." That's what he was talking about. And I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. But I flashed back to, well, I used to really like this guy and felt like I understand him, felt like he was speaking to something. I think what it is catching up with him 10 years later. I'm like, he's still talking about the same shit. Nothing has gotten better. He still hates the world. He hates himself. He hates everybody. And my question is the kind of the Kurt Vonnegut question he asks of all main characters, or he did when he was alive. What does this person want? And at the very end of the documentary, he's talking to his father, I think, who has dementia. He takes him out for a coffee, and he's complaining about how he didn't get nominated for the HBO special for an Emmy. That he says, I just, part of me thinks that I just want to win so I can go up on stage and tell people, fuck you. But I don't even know who those people would be. So it's like, I don't know what this person wants. And to your point about following someone that you admire, like on social media or whatever, getting to know them, I feel like I don't want to know Marc Maron. And the relationships, the other people they get to talk to, like the other comics and stuff, they kind of talk about him. They're not like bowling buddies or anything. They all speak as like, oh, he's a professional that I know. We used to hang out, but now I'm just talking about him in the documentary, largely in the past tense.
I think there's some of that, but I would say the people who like know him a little bit more, like say like Jeff Ross, who came up, around the same time he did, who was his first guest on WTF. I feel like they know a lot more.
But he wasn't interviewed for he shows up in the background of a couple of scenes, but he doesn't get any on camera time.
Yeah, David Cross does. Yeah, I thought. Again, you saw this morning. I didn't, but it's been a while.
It's
but
like Michaela Watkins, Caroline Ray, like a couple of folks. Yeah.
Yeah, John Mulaney and
W. Kamau Bell. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think. Again, I feel like if you weren't, I can't see anybody coming in cold to this at all. Like, why would they?
Well, and I'll give you a reason. And again, I'm going back to the John Candy documentary, which I think is the kind of the gold standard at this point. And it came up in an indirect way during the Q&A conversation last night with, Jim Belushi and Ryan Reynolds and Mark Candy, John Candy's son. Chris, sorry. I'm thinking of Marc Maron. All right. Too many people. Talking about how Ryan Reynolds, I think, made a crack like we told people about this documentary and everybody got super excited unless they were under 24 years old.
Well, right? The difference is because John Candy was a kind, patient, warm, funny, generous guy, whereas Marc Maron is not. Well,
but what I'm talking about is you're asking why would anyone come to this documentary cold? It's also a generational thing because John Candy passed away 31 years ago. Yeah. So it's almost like it's sort of the duty, I think, of a documentary filmmaker if you're going to celebrate or at least depict someone's life. I don't know if this Marc Maron thing is a celebration exactly, but why should we care? Who is he? Like, give us this kind of body of work in this timeline. Mm-hmm. I never got the sense that there's, again, you saw some kind of a difference between beginning and later stage Marc Maron, but I fundamentally did not. He still has these weird complaints about, like, at the end, he's up on stage in some place he got flown out to. It looked like a tiki hut. And he's saying, half you people don't know who I am, and you're going to go back and, go home tonight and say, oh, that guy was pretty funny, or no, he was trash. I'm like, I'm sorry. This movie opens with clips of him on his TV show, on the follow-up TV show in which he starred, in a movie acting with Robert De Niro. and being acknowledged as a pioneer of the podcasting format, and he's been on magazine covers and all these profiles, and yet somehow, quote unquote, nobody knows who Marc Maron is. I can understand if there's like some kind of an exploration of like, well, he wants Tom Cruise level fame, but then he wouldn't want the Tom Cruise level hassle. So again, I go back to, what does Marc Maron want?
Well, that would be a great title. And that's where I think there's, that's the weakness of this documentary. And I liked it more than you, but the weakness of this documentary is that it doesn't delve into that. Like nobody's saying like, why are you complaining, dude? Like you have like, you started acting like well into your career and you're still like kind of, insecure about your acting. I get it. You're primarily a comic and you're coming into acting and you're very curious about it. And even like as a musician, you started riffing a lot more on your guitar with each episode, and now you're playing live in places. I mean, I want it. It's like if I were to sit down and talk to Marc Maron, I'd be like, look how far you've come.
Yeah.
Look what you've done. And I guess it reminded me that like not enough people have that someone in their life to do that for them and with them. And I don't know if Marc Maron does. If he does have somebody like that in his life, maybe that was Lynn. She seemed to have grounded him a little bit, and she seemed to have been the light to his darkness. But it's not apparent in this documentary that he has that. It's like he's got his 2 cats, he's got a podcast, and he's got it. Well, he doesn't have his. He had his podcast. It's basically ending this month. His choice between him and his producer. They were doing 2 episodes a week since 2009. So
yeah,
kudos. That's amazing. So, it would have been nice to delve into like, him from this, him from that. He doesn't think him well enough. Here's Marc Maron,
Dude, if that that should be the trailer. I mean,
yeah, because like to me, especially a comedian who has like I would say he probably records some show of his current like live act for some kind of special, whether it be HBO or Amazon or whatever, at least once every 2 years, if not once a year. So, earlier, I think in May, he released an HBO special, and that was pretty revealing. It was really well done. And then, like the next month, he's announcing, in October we're ending this, and then the same month, October, there's this kind of serendipitously released documentary. Are we good? So it's like, is obviously a lot of this was all like planned to, it's all about timing, releasing and everything. Is his departure in October meant to also like, I don't know, gain more attention to this documentary? Are we good because it's being released around the same month? I don't know. It's not coincidence, I feel like, all this stuff is all planned out and everything. But again, coming in cold to this, like I really feel like somebody is going to come to this because they know about Marc Maron, either from his acting, or from, 3 things: acting, his comic work, or the podcast. And I think primarily the podcast, because that's if you're a loyal listener, you've got to learn a lot about him and how he does his thing and why he does it well, and so if you wanted more of that, or if you're hoping for more of that, you'd probably come into this. But, like I said at the onset, I think there's a little bit of a limitation here about what was going to be covered in this documentary, because we're not getting the same type of vulnerability as his podcast, and whatever, that's fine. But, it would have been nice to have that.
And, I'm hoping that at some point someone will make a documentary just about podcasts in general and kind of the rise, and, maybe it'll be after the fall or whatever.
Series, yeah.
Yeah, because something very interesting happens, in the later part of the doc, he starts lamenting Dave Chappelle, and he has a big bone to pick with Joe Rogan. Now, Joe Rogan is like, if you're talking about Marc Maron being a pioneer, it's also Joe Rogan. He's got
Sure.
like the number one podcast like on the planet.
I think they started around the same time too.
Right.
Yeah.
So what's the beef? Is it purely political? Is it a jealousy? What does Joe Rogan think about this? Did Rogan was he inspired to start because of Maron or what? And Maron has been on social media lately, like making fun of like Rogan's fans as he does in this movie, and also Theo Vaughn, who's another kind of a conservative leaning podcaster who kind of plays to that crowd. So there's too many like seeds that are planted throughout this movie that you could develop into full stories that just aren't. They're just kind of left to die. I was going to say left to die on the vine, but there's no vine because they're just seeds. I'm mixing up my metaphors. But yeah, there's a lot here that I was looking for. And what I walked away with at the end was, man, I haven't checked in with this guy in 10 years. I'm not really compelled to go back and listen to the decades worth of shows that I've missed. The answer to "Are we good?" is, yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, exactly. It would have been helpful to have, since this relationship seemed to be kind of life-changing between him and Shelton.
Yeah,
it would have been nice to have, like, I mean, there's got to be footage of them hanging out. Like, I mean, there is some in this documentary, but I mean, like, and not just hanging out together, but hanging out, obviously they must have hung out with friends and stuff, but like, what were they like together? And how was that different? How was this relationship that they were having different from any of the relationships either of them had? What was it all about? Well, how was it different? That would have been interesting to know. And I mean, honestly, if you've been listening to his show all along, you notice that once he started dating Lynn, you could tell a difference. And he was open about it. He's like, guys, look, this is, I feel like a lot of this has to do with my current, personal life, and that's great. I'm happy for you. But, I feel like there's a kind of a missed opportunity here. And maybe that's just because out of respect for, Shelton's family or whatever, that let's just keep this to a minimum. Fine. But, man, I mean, I remember listening to his episode where he first like came back and actually like, started talking about like losing her, and it's pretty emotional. I mean, it was nice to see that side of him, and I think a lot of us who've ever lost a loved one can obviously relate to that. And that's the thing, is I think he's a lot more relatable than he would like people to believe, and like a lot of his concerns and problems and issues aren't solely assigned to him. Like he can't, there's a lot of things that he's concerned about and he's, vocal about, that a lot of us think about. We just don't have we all don't have the same platform as he does.
Well, and that's something else that could have been explored, is he talks we see a lot of him in his house, and he's like cooking food on his gorgeous, like gigantic range. And he's like, this great kitchen and bedrooms, and like, it's a nice place. But to hear him talk about it, and I think maybe it was Brendan, his producer, was talking about like, yeah, when we first started this, he was practically broke. Like he wasn't sure what his future, if he was going to have a future. And now he's living in this like really nice house. And the early shots we get of the garage, he's like lifting up this giant door, and it's all like panel wood and like cluttery bookshelves and, kind of paraphernalia everywhere. It looks really cool. It looks like this office behind me. But then when we see the later studio, it looks like a modern day McDonald's or a Panera Bread. It's like sparse walls, giant gray, soundproof paneling, and very little kind of personality. And I could watch an entire, half hour on just that transformation of like going from kind of rags to riches, reinventing yourself. And then what was the deal of like kind of sucking out that personality from the aesthetic? Is that because it was a bad look to have the president in the garage. We got to step it up a bit. Yeah. I don't know. But again, I'm watching these things and just like picking up little bits visually or things in the corner. I'm like, what's the story there?
It also, I know that it's not just covering the podcast, but it would also have been cool to see, like, because there were episodes that he recorded that, like, where he had to actually like travel somewhere to do the episodes.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought the Gallagher episode was one of those because he stormed out of a hotel. But in the documentary, they show it as Gallagher storming out of the garage. It was kind of like it was a cartoon kind of a thing, but
kind of like a recreation in a way.
Right. But I'm like, that was a hotel room, I think, because he didn't bump over a room service cart or something. Yeah.
Because when you think about it, if you're recording 2 of these episodes, and Brendan McDonald was never, like, as far as I could tell, for like 98% of the recording, he was not on site. He was in a different state. He would produce it, all that kind of thing. But it would have been cool to just like see, out of when you're recording 2 episodes a week for that amount of time, there's no way you could do every one of them in your garage, because he's also traveling for his comedy tours, and not to mention getting more work, acting work. So, I don't know. I like hanging with him. I like, listening to him, rant about stuff in general. So, if that's something that's interesting to you, it might, or something that you've been doing, then you may like this. Your mileage may vary, but I do agree that there's some weak points here that could have been delved into a little bit more. It would have been nice.
Yeah. But hey, no documentary is perfect, except John Candy, I Like Me, which we'll be talking about coming up soon. Shameless plug. Well, David, thank you again for recommending this documentary. Even though I didn't care for it, I am glad I watched it. But I got to admit, like after the first 10 minutes, I kind of felt like it must have been like I was living inside Marc Maron's head. I was like deeply sighing and thinking, I don't know if I want to do this.
You were thinking WTF.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you probably started watching it at 5 a.m. too. So
no, 4:35.
4:35. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
As he probably meant for you to watch it. Again, I think it's more so for diehard fans. Again, the difference between this and Candy is Candy's got a breadth of work that's a little bit more, much more noteworthy and noteworthy and famous, what he's famous for, whereas Maron is kind of has captured this whole following through people listening to his voice primarily. So
again, you're right, it is apples to oranges in terms of the types of entertainers they are. I'm talking strictly about
documentary approach.
Yes, the storytelling of it, the creating a full piece of art as if you're telling a fictional story. Because if this were done as a piece of fiction, I think a lot of people would be like, who is this? What's going on? I don't believe any of this. Right. But anyway, I'm done ranting. We're gonna get out of here. Lock the gates. Sorry. But David Fowley of Keeping It Real, thank you again. We'll be talking very soon about other things. I'm going to be seeing you very soon for a screening. I mean, we're hanging out a lot in the last 24 hours. But yeah, until next time, everybody. Oh, please like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications, all that good stuff. Be sure and follow David at Keeping It Real. All of his information is down below. And until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thank you very much and take care. Hey everyone, Ian here. I know, long time no see. But if you like the video you just watched, feel free to subscribe to Kicking the Seat right here, and also check out the playlist and recommended video right here. Thanks for watching.